Good afternoon. This is Peter Stanton. I'm the publisher of the Worcester Business Journal and your moderator for today's session on the CARES Act, round 2 of the PPL and EIDL funding, which we opened officially for new applications this morning at 10:30. And we're also going to review some of the other SBA-related programs and some advice for small businesses and nonprofits during the COVID-19 crisis. This program is part of our ongoing COVID-19 webcast series on managing through the crisis. It is made possible through the support of our presenting sponsors, Webster 5 and Fallon Health. Today we have three terrific panelists. We have Robert Nelson, the District Director for Massachusetts of the U.S. Small Business Administration. We have Chris Watson, who is a Senior VP and Senior Lending Officer for Webster 5. And also joining us is Richard Cheney, who's the Regional Director of the Small Business Development Center, which is housed at Worcester's Clark University. So in this session, we're going to go over the status of the current PPP and SBA lending programs, the latest guidance on rules for applying and qualifying for forgiveness, the PPP loan process from the bank's perspective. We'll also look at the other small business loan programs in the CARES Act, including the EIDL, small business bridge loans, and debt relief, as well as talk about a Fed-funded loan program, and about the best strategy that small business owners can apply when planning for the future, minimizing risk, and navigating through this crisis. And then we've got a couple dozen questions that were sent in beforehand, and also we're going to be taking questions live, which we'll be reading and filtering through to our panelists. First in line, we're going to hear from Mass SBA Director Robert Nelson, who, like many of us, has turned from a beginner to a webcast expert in the last few weeks. Bob has been the head of the Mass SBA office since 2008, just before the last economic crisis. And Bob, I know it's been a crazy last month for you and your team at the SBA, and we'd love to have you share with the audience some of the opportunities that this latest round of legislation funding allows, and any other SBA programs that we all ought to have on our radar screen as we sort of proceed through what is going to be a difficult year. Bob.
Well, great. Thank you, Peter, and certainly my pleasure to be with all of you and with our other panelists today. So happy to have Chris Watson and Richard Cheney as part of the presentation. But Peter, thank you for what you're doing. Small businesses certainly are looking for a lot of information and a lot of guidance, and we're going to do our best today to try to provide the best answers that we have available at the current time. But I wanted to just start off real quickly and to talk about PPP and round 1, and because I really think it's amazing when you hear of the numbers. So for the first round under the CARES Act, SBA, we had $350 billion for the PPP program, and we did 1,661 loans nationwide with the help of just about 5,000 lenders. But when you look at Massachusetts, the activity in Massachusetts, we did just about 47,000 approvals under PPP for $10.3 billion. And I share that just because it doesn't happen with just SBA staff. It's because of the hard work of many banks across the Commonwealth and with the help of our resource partners. I know when you look at 47,000 approvals, and then SBA came out and said, we're looking for the banks to fund and to close these loans within 10 days. The banks have really been working in overdrive and through weekends and late hours in order to try to get these loans into the hands of small business. And that's what this is all about, trying to provide them with a lifeline so that they can survive and hopefully to recover as we get past this disaster. But last a week ago Thursday, we ran out of funding and appropriations. Very pleased that we were given additional appropriations to get the the PPP round 2 back up and running, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I just wanted to also share our data as far as the economic injury loan. So while SBA has taken down the disaster loan application portal at sba.gov/disaster, we've continued to process PPP loans and to make those disaster loan advances, which are forgivable. They don't have to be repaid, and they go up to $10,000 based upon $1,000 per employee up to the $10,000 max. But in Massachusetts, so far, this is as of April 24th, we've done 768 economic injury loans for $153 million. Certainly, we compare very favorably with other states around the country. On the advanced grants, we've done almost 26,000 as of April 24th, and that's for $110 million. So a huge, capital infusion for small businesses out there. It's only $10,000, but certainly it's the initial start with getting them some capital. But let me talk about the PPP program with the new bill that was approved. And so again, we stood this up pretty quickly. And as Peter mentioned, SBA started accepting applications at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning. Under the Paycheck Protection Program, the loans, they go up to $10 million. There's no personal signature required. There's no collateral requirements. There's no underwriting as far as repayment ability. What the small business is doing is providing their payroll information to the lender. The lender is verifying that payroll information. And, the lender submits the application to SBA through an electronic process called E-Tran. But once they submit a complete application to us, they get an instantaneous approval from the SBA. Then once they have that approval, an SBA loan number is assigned and the funds are reserved against the appropriations. So with the new bill, SBA got $310 billion for new PPP loans. Of that $310 billion, 60 of it is being carved out for smaller financial institutions, smaller lenders, smaller credit unions, CDFIs, and it's all about trying to make sure that there's equal access and opportunity for everyone. And so with that 60 billion, it's earmarked and hoped for that it's going to help underserved communities and underserved small businesses to get access to those loans because it's critically needed. But under this second round of funding, and it has to do with the economic injury disaster loan. So again, SBA's economic injury loans, the portal is not open right now for new applications or to request those grants. I'm not sure when it will be open, but under the bill that was approved, what SBA basically got was $50 billion. When you look at our subsidy model, what that translates into is $350 billion worth of room for new economic injury loans. We also received $10 billion with the funding for additional economic injury disaster loan grants. So certainly there's a lot of money in the bill for SBA, and I know that lenders have been working feverishly starting this morning at 10:30, trying to submit applications. Certainly, there is some clunkiness on the part of the system. The system is not crashing, but it is taking lenders longer than they would normally be taking them to submit a application to the SBA for our approval. So hopefully that smooths out with time. But when you're talking about the entire country trying to submit electronic applications for new PPP loans, it's certainly a system that is it's holding up, but there's a lot of demand on it. So over on the right, I'm just trying to see what that is. So small business debt relief. So as part of the initial CARES Act, and this is where Massachusetts is also going to come out very well, just because we are often one of the most productive SBA offices in the entire country when it comes to SBA approvals. I'm talking about our regular loan programs, so our 7A guarantee, our 504 program, our microloan program. Under the debt relief, what SBA will be doing is making 6 months worth of payments on existing SBA borrowers' loans that are out there. And so there are, last year, we did about 1,700 loans, significant dollars, and every year we do a huge chunk of SBA lending, and so all these businesses are going to have the benefit of 6 months worth of payments being made by SBA. So a big shot in the arm for the economy and for these small businesses. But for new SBA borrowers that are applying with lenders, SBA will also be paying 6 months worth of payments on those loans as long as they're applied for by, I believe the date is in the middle of September. So if we could go to the next slide. So with SBA, you heard me mention, this is the stuff that we normally do. And so our counseling and technical assistance, we have an amazing partner network. You're going to get to hear from Richard Cheney directly from the Small Business Development Center, but we have 6 chapters of SCORE across the state. We have the Center for Women in Enterprise, which is in Central Mass and also Boston. But everyone is working remotely, but remotely is working. And people are, they've transitioned to Zoom meetings, GoToMeetings, Skype, but, certainly just email counseling and over the phone. It's something that people have adapted to, and it's working. Our partners are doing a tremendous job with helping small businesses to navigate all of these different disaster relief programs in giving our small businesses advice. So just as far as our regular loan programs, they're still open. We're still doing 7A guarantee loans. We're still doing microloans in 504. But one of the other areas that SBA plays a huge role is in government contracting. And certainly there's a lot of requests going out for new contracts for whether it's PPP or cleaning or disinfecting services, things that you could imagine would be real hot right now given this disaster and this environment. But at the SBA, we have some certification programs in order to even out the playing field, but our ultimate goal is to make sure that small businesses get their fair share of government contracts. And then the last thing is disaster assistance. So this is something that we're always involved with, whether you think of floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, but even smaller disasters. But right now, the entire country, all 50 states and U.S. territories have declared disaster declarations, and SBA is working hard to try to make sure that small businesses have the capital that they need so that they can survive. We can go to the next slide. So this is just a timeline as far as the economic stimulus. And so, I think the important thing here is that, SBA, we got a full statewide declaration on March 18th. That's when we started doing economic injury disaster loans. Since March 18th, the entire country, as I mentioned, all 50 states have declarations. But we've been consumed with PPP loans and helping small businesses to try to get them the guidance that they need and encouraging them to apply for those loans. And again, with the PPP, it's for 8 weeks of payroll, but other expenses can be included in it, like mortgage interest or rent payments or utilities. But 75% of the loan is for payroll purposes, and 25% can be for those other interest, rent, utility payments. And the beauty of the PPP is that 100% of the loan has the potential to be forgiven. And so, again, there's no personal signature, there's no collateral. If the portion of the loan that does not get forgiven, it's a 1% interest rate with a 2-year term. But yeah, I would encourage small businesses to look at what is the potential forgivable portion. That's the amount that I would be going for and trying to make sure that I achieve the targets as far as retaining employees on the payroll or bringing employees back onto the payroll. That's the whole purpose of the PPP program, trying to make sure that when we get the all clear and businesses can get back to doing business, that they're not essentially a startup trying to find staff and to hire people. They'll have their employees on the payroll and they can get back to business as quickly as possible. But we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and so again, so the thing with economic injury, disaster loans and grants, these are applied for through the SBA. The portal is not open right now. As soon as it is and we get information on that, we'll be pushing that out to everyone through all of our different channels. But the economic injury loan, I just want to make a distinction. So the PPP is a short-term shot in the arm for these businesses with 8 weeks worth of payments that they're going to be making on their payroll and these other expenses. With the economic injury loan, the application period doesn't expire until December 2020. And so with businesses might not know the full extent of their economic injury, depending on how this progresses, there might be the need for an increase to an already approved economic injury loan. And again, these economic injury loans, they go up to $2 million with terms of up to 30 years at low interest rates. And this is for the long-term recovery of these businesses and helping them to survive and recover. So the next slide. So we'll pass on this right now, but for folks who are listening and looking at this, so the application for SBA's economic injury loan and the advanced grants is through www.sba.gov/disaster. It is not accepting applications right now. We're waiting to find out when SBA will open up that portal so that new applications can be submitted, or if someone has not requested one of those advanced grants, they have the opportunity to do so. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, we talked about the debt relief, so I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions and to hear from Chris and Richard, so we can just skip to the next one. So assistance from our partners. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Richard Cheney for his remarks, and there might be an additional slide. But again, the services through the Small Business Development Center, SBA provides basically 50% of their operating budget through the SBA. A quarter of it comes from the Commonwealth, and a quarter of it is through support from educational institutions. But we really have an amazing, passionate staff of resource partners. And as I started off initially with my remarks, it really is a small business team with everyone trying to help with this disaster and to survive the virus and to help these small businesses in order to be there when we do get the all clear. So Richard, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, Bob, I think we're going to go actually next to Chris Watson, and then we'll go to Richard. But we actually have that slide when Richard appears of Richard's full staff, so we can talk about the SBDC. So Chris is a senior VP and senior lending officer and heads up the business banking team at Webster 5. And he's been in the industry for 30 plus years. And it actually was just a year ago that Webster 5, the business banking team, received the Lender of the Quarter for Q2 in 2019, an SBA recognition for their significant increase in volume from the prior periods. And so, needless to say, Chris, that volume went up, is going up again in Q2 of 2020, so rather dramatically. So as someone who's kind of sitting in the banker's side of this whole process, wonder if we could get your perspective on the program and your experience with it, and any advice you can give to folks who are either on either side of that process right now.
Sure. Thank you, Peter, and welcome all. And I'm happy to be here with Bob and Richard. I'd have to, also want to give out some kudos to the SBA, Bob and your team, and just across the country. You think about the magnitude of this whole program and the fact that back on March 27th, Congress passed this project at $350 billion, and then kind of hand the keys over to you guys and said, figure it out and deploy the money. And you had about 4 business days to do it, but you did it. And all the banks were eager to participate. I know my team here, from early Sunday right all the way through till the opening gun on April 3rd. We were, gathering applications because the phones were ringing, and, working with the guidance that was continually coming out from you and your team and putting this program together. But I got to say, 30 years of doing this, I've never seen any type of program like this. Never seen the response from the businesses. We expected some increased volumes, whether it's through email or phone calls, but there was nothing of this magnitude have I experienced. But, and talking to my brethren at other banks in the area, all the banks in particular, everybody was ready to go. We put in lots of hours, as Bob said, leading up to April 3rd, and then, getting these packages in. The team was ready and willing to do whatever it took to get the applications processed and approved and get these monies out to, the community, which is what we're here to support. The first day was a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, trying to figure this out and get a process down. But, pretty much everybody in the business banking team and the bank throughout, dropped everything they had and said, let's put a plan together. And after, by day 2 of the program, we had a nice flow of information entering into the bank through our call center. The branches were ready to take in overflow calls. Our cash management team dropped everything that they were doing and sending out emails to get the application process going for the inquiries that were coming in through the website. Credit department was vetting all the information that was coming in to make sure that, the dollar amount that the borrower was calculating was similar to our calculation. And all the lenders were doing an approval, an abbreviated approval, a 1-pager, and getting it into E-Trans. It was, by the end of the first day, we had a nice assembly line, get these packages through. The packages that were, again, they really simplified this product. It was basically an application, and we were sending out an Excel spreadsheet that would help them calculate what the payroll was for the 2.5 months and the associated expenses that go along with it. There was a few questions we were asking that we know that was part of the SBA approval and the E-Trans system. And so, what I would say is for those that have not applied yet, just make sure your package is complete. I think a lot of folks we found, my bank and as other banks were kind of, putting it on a priority basis as applications were received. But they were putting in we were asking for the application and your calculation of your payroll and, your 940 and 941 from your payroll company. And they were just submitting just the application, figuring I'm in the queue now. But then when we came to the application, we found the other information was missing. So we'd have to, reach out, make that phone call, have a conversation with them. And a lot of times they have to get back to us with the other pieces of information. So it's not that difficult of an application package. Like I said, 2-3 pieces of information, your application is complete, and then it doesn't slow it down. So I guess the most important thing I would say is make sure the application is complete, whether it's Webster 5 or any other bank that's asking for it. It's very simple. If you have any questions, you can call your banker, call your accountant. A lot of the applications we came in. They used their accountant as an advisor. And, so then we know that the information that we're getting is pretty accurate. One of the other things, aside from the PPP, I would say, we could talk about a little later. In addition to, the programs that are out there, a lot of the community banks, what we're doing as well is we are offering, 3-month payment deferrals. So if they have existing debt with us, as the SBA is doing, where the SBA is making payments on the SBA supported products to the banks on behalf of the borrowers. If you have other debt with us, we're putting in 3-month deferrals. That's, separate from this program, but it's also, providing additional relief for the borrowers. So that's all I have right now.
Great, Chris. Thank you. And it's a good perspective to have. So in introducing Richard Chaney, I thought, Bob, you mentioned Richard and the SBDC, and you said they're among your partners who help small businesses navigate, a lot of the loan programs. And I think, Richard, that's probably a really good word for what your team does. I know when you and I spoke, you mentioned, you're really dealing with hundreds of businesses throughout the region, helping, whether they're starting or growing or managing or buying or selling. You're on the ground with folks offering free consulting services. Yeah. So I imagine most of your attention has been turned to the pandemic and what's going on with PPP loans and otherwise. But for a little perspective, how are you advising small businesses to kind of navigate these set of loan opportunities and this whole kind of crisis that we're in?
Well, thanks, Peter. Yeah, this has actually been a real eye-opener and an opportunity to learn. Now, I've been with the SBDC, the Massachusetts SBDC, since 2016. But I go back to the Connecticut SBDC since the early 1900s, 1992 is when I started with them. So I've got a long kind of history with them. I've never seen anything like this because if I could characterize what we're dealing with right now is just a tremendous sense of concern about what the future holds. Normally, when we're working with a business, and we're working with either what is called a nascent entrepreneur or person who's interested in opening a business but hasn't done it yet, or with a person who has opened a business either less than a year or maybe a little more than a year, so they're current business owner, but we're dealing with what our expectations, our estimate as to what's going to happen in the future. So someone's opening a business, we have to make some projections about revenue and about expenses, and we try to do that based upon some history or some other, looking at other businesses within the same NAICS code or SIC, it used to be called SIC code. None of that is happening today. I have, back in March, I had about 7 people I was working with, all of whom were buying a business. Now, when you're buying a business, all of these clients had an opportunity to look back sometimes 5 to 10 to 15 years of revenue and operating expense experience. We can use that information and make projections about the future. So when we go to a lender, such as Chris at Webster or some other lender, we can say our expectations about revenue and expenses are such and such based upon this history. Usually we're pretty accurate within plus or minus 5 or 10, maybe 15%. That's not the case today. So when somebody came to me and said, look, I'm about to close on a bank loan, and I made the comment a number of times to clients, banks are still in the business of making loans. That's part of what they do. They asked the question, well, should I do this? And my answer has been, and I think I can say for all of my colleagues at the central office here in Worcester, we're saying be cautious right now. We're not saying don't go through with the project, don't make the transaction and buy the business. We're saying, yes, do that, but we have to be very, very careful about what the future is going to hold and what our expectations are going to be, because there could be a significant drop-off. If a person purchases a business today with an expectation that they're going to get a certain amount of revenue based upon history, well, that history, with what we're seeing coming next month and in the fall and in the winter, and the expectations that the outbreak could reemerge, we have to be very careful about how we counsel our clients. But that's part of the job. I mean, this business is going on, such as it is. There is going to be a new normal, and the question is, well, what will that new normal be like, and what can we count on, and what do we think is definitely going to change? As far as whether or not revenue expectations will be accurate, that's a very difficult question to answer. But we're still doing the same things we've always done. We're working with people who want to build a business, start a business, although right now I could say without fear of contradiction, the number of people who are calling us as new clients who want to start a business have dropped off precipitously. As a matter of fact, back in March, right, literally the day before we decided to work remotely, I sent out an email to 5,000 of our current and old clients who go back a year or two. And almost everyone, well, not everyone contacted me, but almost 95, 96% of the people who have contacted me and the rest of our staff at Clark have been about, how do I apply for the payroll protection plan? And should I apply for the emergency loan? And our comments there have been always, almost to a person, you should apply for both, with the understanding that they cover similar areas, but they do have different characteristics, and they both can be very valuable to the client. We still are doing our functional business areas where we talk about human resource issues. We do a lot of SBIR, or what otherwise known as small business innovation research clients. We still have businesses purchasing one another and selling their businesses. But some of the new things that are coming out would be business resiliency, for example, branding their business, scaling their business, exit strategies. These are areas that we've talked about in the past with our clients, but they're becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, we're seeing more and more exit strategy issues, resiliency issues. How do I deal with a supply chain that's been, I don't know if I want to say devastated, because that's kind of a real pejorative term, but I mean, it's been really significantly negatively impacted. And again, we don't know what the future is going to hold for some of these businesses. I mean, if you talk about people in the food industry, for example, you hear on the one hand, people, in the meat industry, I'm talking about the people who actually work with me, they're actually doing more and more business. But if you look at the supply chain, there's a concern that we're going to see a drop in that supply chain, and obviously that's going to have an impact on a variety of businesses. So one of the things we're trying to work on is building a series of webinars. We do this once a week. We're putting out a webinar on Thursdays on the most current issues that are affecting our businesses, whether that deals with the CARES Act or other aspects of business. We're doing that once a week for the foreseeable future. We're also looking at building other programs and other areas of expertise that we have used in the past, but not as much. Like I said before, business resiliency and scaling of a business, things of that nature. We've also embarked on a couple of other things. We have built a long relationship with the Latin American Business Organization, otherwise known as LABO, and we've done a series of workshops with them in Spanish. We'll continue to do that going forward. We're also becoming far more aggressive in our relationship with Clark University and the Graduate School of Management. In the past, the central office has participated with the Grad School of Management by teaching a capstone course in their MBA program. So what we're proposing and what they've accepted now is we're going to expand the number of graduate assistantships we have from 2 to 8. And we're anticipating maybe bringing somebody else on to help when our clients receive the PPP and or the EIDL funds, and how they're going to manage those funds going forward and how they're going to manage their business going forward. We're anticipating a kind of an increase in the number of clients that are going to be asking us information and counseling and advice in those areas. After that, I don't know what the expectation will be for our how many clients we'll see per year. Right now, we are seeing between 600 and 700 clients a year, and usually we're engaged with a capital formation of around $20 million a year. In other words, our clients are using their own equity funds and borrowing money, usually between 20 and 26 million coming out of this office. Whether or not we're going to see those statistics again in the future remains to be seen. But I have an expectation that we are going to see a number of increase in clients dealing with how to reemerge, how to reinvent themselves, how to reopen their business. That's kind of all we're doing right now. We're still trying. We are working remotely, and so we're learning to do our work a little differently, because up until now, almost all of our work has been done face to face. We also continue to run a series of workshops. We usually run 10 to 15 workshops a year. We finished about 8 or so in the fall. We had planned on another 8 for the spring. We had to actually discontinue those, although now we're looking at possibly bringing those workshops back on a webinar basis. So we continue to try to reach out to our clients and be there to help them with any question they have that is dealing with their business, dealing with capital formation, dealing with borrowing money, and how to best position themselves for the future.
So, all right, Richard, well, that's terrific. Thank you. Hey, so we've got about 10, maybe 15 minutes to field some of the questions. And when I looked at attendees' questions, I noticed that people really fall on sort of one side of the transom or the other. Most have already received the PPP funding, and they had some questions about qualifying. And then others have some questions on that sort of application end. But why don't we start with the qualifying questions? And Bob, we spoke about this earlier. The question was, is there a specific form? When is there more guidance going to be coming out, and where can people find it related to the exact elements of what qualifies on that end of that 8 weeks when folks come back and say, I want forgiveness?
Right. So the website that I think that people should be looking at is Treasury's website. They have the most current information. SBA's website will build off of what's on Treasury's website, but I would strongly suggest that people, if they're looking at the PPP, they want to understand the rules, go on to treasury.gov. There's a section for small businesses, a section for lenders. There is new information that is being posted pretty much on a daily basis. So one of the things that just got posted today, I wish it was available 3 weeks ago, but it's how to calculate a loan amount, depending on what type of business you are, whether you're a sole proprietorship or a sole proprietorship with employees, whether you're a partnership. But so that document is out there right now. As far as the forgiveness portion, so I think everyone knows that this program has been built on the fly, and SBA is providing guidance, as it becomes available. I know that a lot of folks are interested in how the forgiveness is going to work, the mechanics of it. But to be honest with you, so the forgiveness, a small business is not going to be able to ask for forgiveness till 7 weeks or so after they get the loan. So we're certainly weeks away from, how that is going to happen. But what the guidance is right now is that the small business is going to demonstrate with their lender that they've used the funds appropriately, that they've been able to either retain employees on their payroll or to get employees back on their payroll. The 8-week clock starts ticking at the time of the initial disbursement. They're going to start using the funds to make payroll expenses, to meet payroll, and to use these other expenses. And so they're, as far as the form that would be used for the bank to determine the forgivable portion in SBA's role in that, we're all waiting for the guidance to come out on that.
And so, Chris, that's something that obviously, as a banker, you guys don't have that yet in your hands and are waiting for that.
We don't, but what the discussions we're having and what we're advising is basically, you had the information to start with to apply for PPP. So you were able to prove what your payroll was in the past. And, so you should be able to prove what your payroll was from the 8 weeks. Again, there are some other qualifying expenses that they can use it for, utilities, rent. So just keep the same records you've been keeping in the past, and you should be able to prove what you need for being forgiven.
So
So-
if I could, Peter, just to build on that. So in the information that we have, when it talks about the forgiveness, it talks about the number of staff. Your loan forgiveness will be reduced if you decrease your full-time employee headcount. As far as rehiring, and this is important, you have until June 30th to restore your full-time employment and salary levels for any changes that were made between February 15th and April 26th. So, if you furloughed people in that time period, we're looking for you to get them back on the payroll. But if you look at this stuff, it also talks about that the forgiveness would be reduced if you decrease salaries by more than 25%. So I get the question all the time, do they have to be the same employees? They don't. Can you pay them more? Yes, you can. But we want the employees to be back on the business's payroll if they've been furloughed and if they're on unemployment.
So one of the questions what related to that, Bob, was can employees be paid bonuses? And I think as long as all of that compensation happens underneath that $100,000 threshold, that it can be done during this period and be forgiven.
Correct. Yeah. So if the guidance talks about not reducing salary levels, so if you need to provide, a bonus to an employee in order to get them back on your payroll, that's something that you could certainly do. That you could pay more. But the whole purpose is trying to get headcounts back to where they were, and the magic date is June 30th.
So one more question from a manufacturer who was basically looking at less volume. And he said, so basically I'm going to be paying some workers to not show up. And he says, is that common in the PPP? That is happening in some cases, correct? So that they stay on payroll.
Right. And so if you think of it, if a business is not essential, if they're not open, they're not able to open, there's nothing in the law that talks about that the employee that you bring back on the payroll has to be doing something physically. But if the employer has something for the employee to do, they could be doing that remotely. But if not, they're on your payroll, you're having weekly or daily check-ins with your employees. I think that makes a lot of sense. But those employees, if there's nothing for them to do right now at the moment, they don't have to be doing anything at the moment. Right. But they're on the payroll and they're ready to get back to work once we get the all clear.
Sounds good. So go ahead.
I was just going to add, part of the strategy, we're applying as a technical advisor would be, if you're a business and you're anticipating the opportunity to reopen your business, it's much better to have your employees on the payroll, ready to come back to work. It makes that transition far more smoother than it would be if they had to not be on payroll, collecting unemployment, and then having them come off the unemployment payroll. It's much better to have them already there to make that transition smooth.
Got it. So here's a rather narrow question, and while I ask it, we may have a specific answer or not. I spoke with Terry Shepard, who runs the accounting and CPA firm S&G, and he volunteered that some of the questions, if we don't get to them today, we can send to him and he can write directly to the folks who submitted them, which I think would be very helpful. But here's a rather narrow one that I thought was interesting. Can we include internet and phone expenses as part of that kind of utility cost that is one of the forgivable elements?
I would say yes. Yeah, that is a utility.
Interesting. That's good. And someone else wanted to confirm that their company pays. They have the company portion of the healthcare, and then they have a portion that their employees pay. And they were wondering whether they submit the whole bill or whether forgivable is the portion that the company would be paying.
Yeah, so, as far as the loan amount, it's the gross wages plus tips, plus the pre-tax employee contribution for health or other fringe benefits. So it's the employee contribution. So, Chris, I'm not sure whether you have anything that you wanted to add on to that?
No, we're including that in the, the employee contribution piece.
Yeah.
Based on the guidance, we're just following the guidance that the
Right.
SBA has put out, so.
We've been telling people the same thing.
Okay. All right, so here's another one. One of the questions was related to payroll, the dates of payroll, and the dates of utility payments and other qualifying things. Do they all have to happen in that magical 8-week window, all those checks, or do they just have to be expenses incurred during that period and the payment is a little more flexible?
This is a government program, and if I were a small business out there, I'd be making sure that I'm keeping really good records. I know from talking with, a different SBDC advisor that they were advising their clients to have separate accounts for the PPP money. That way, there will be exact and good accounting as far as what the funds were used for specifically. In the end, you want to make sure that as much of the loan is going to be forgiven as possible. And so the guidance that we have out there is that the clock starts ticking 8 weeks after the initial disbursement. And, I've seen nothing where that gets into the weeds as far as, can they, use the money to pay something that they incurred prior to the 8 weeks. I'd be following the guidance that is out there, that is on Treasury's website. It's the 8 weeks following the initial disbursement of the loan. That's when you're spending the money.
So folks ought to keep those payments within that period. Another question then, I know, Richard, you had mentioned that you're recommending to folks that they apply to the EIDL and the PPP. Related to the EIDL, Bob, you mentioned that the site is currently not open for new applications, but I think it was 60 billion that came in. Someone had noted that the demand for it last time was over $300 billion. So is there anticipation that will open up again, or was there previous applications are going to spend most of this money?
So if in the beginning part of my remarks, I talked about how under this most recent bill, there was 50 billion, and what that 50 billion translates into is 350 billion of additional EIDL loans. And so I know that SBA, that we have millions of applications that we've received. I don't know when SBA will reopen the portal to accept new applications. And again, as soon as we get that information, we're going to let the world know about it. And there is the money for economic injury loan advances, where we got $10 billion worth of additional authority there. While we're not accepting new applications, and we haven't been for about a week or so now, SBA continues to process economic injury loans and to approve them. And it has actually sped up quite nicely over the last week, where I'm seeing approvals of 75 in a day for Massachusetts, 100 in a day. There was one day that there was 250. So the SBA has certainly sped up the approval process on these IO loans. We do know that we have millions of applications that we need to work through the system in various stages of the process. And it is a process. And especially when you're talking about that many applications coming in the matter of a couple of weeks.
Got it. So I know we're actually at 2:50. I was hoping we could go like 5 more minutes. Is that okay with everyone? Just so we can get a few more of these questions in?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Time? Okay. So one of the questions, and this was someone who hadn't been funded yet, was from a church, and they kind of stopped on the application because, it said like owner or other words that sounded like a business, right? And they kind of took over some of that. So their question was, is there going to be guidance given to nonprofits and churches that's specific, or do they need to sort of morph their way into the existing form? Chris, have you handled religious groups, or Bob?
We have actually, I think we've probably done, 5 to 10 churches in the local community. So again, I would just say call their advisor, their accountant or the banker that they're dealing with, and they could walk them through the application package to, fill in the right information. But we have done, good 10 to 12 of them.
So, Peter, I wanted to, again, reference that document that was just posted on Treasury's website as far as calculating the maximum loan amount. There is a section in there for nonprofits and religious entities. I think what is getting nonprofits and religious organizations hung up is on the application, and there is only one application form, so there is not a separate application for nonprofits or religious entities. It talks about the owner and the percentage ownership, and so an individual has to be on that application with the individual's social security number. The person who is signing that application and making the certifications, these are really important, that they're looking at the certifications, that they're able to make those certifications, but it has to be from an authorized representative of the religious organization or the nonprofit. I believe with SBA, when we're processing those loans into the electronic system, we can't have a zero in there as far as percent ownership. It's not material when it comes to a nonprofit or a religious organization, but something has to be in there for whoever is entering that data through that electronic process. But we do need an individual's name with their social security number, and they have to be an authorized official as part of that entity. So I hope that clears up some of the confusion there. So certainly we want them to apply.
Yeah, head administrator or board chair, that type of.
Executive director, yeah.
Yeah, whoever's been authorized by that organization to be able to sign documents on behalf of that entity. But don't stop the application because you're getting confused about percent ownership. You're just putting the individual's name with their social security number, and the bank will enter it into the system. And again, with PPP, it's a non-recourse loan. There's no personal signature. There's no collateral. So we've done a lot of nonprofits, a lot of religious organizations with the PPP.
That's great. So question for, again, this is on the side of folks who haven't found processed their forms yet. If they don't have a banking relationship, Chris, I know some banks have taken on some non-customers, others are not doing that at this point. And Bob, I think on your site there are some of the a big list of lenders and fintech lenders as well, which are people like Cabbage, and we were going to run an attachment of fintech lenders. But Chris, what is the advice for someone, or Bob or Richard, in terms of shopping for someone to process the loan app if they don't have a banking relationship?
Well, again, I hate to keep saying this, but work with your financial advisor, your accountant. Just about, everybody should have an accountant. And if they go to their accountant, then the accountant, has relationships with banks. We have done some non-customers, and they're basically, I would call them warm leads that come in, through, the local CPAs. So they're vetting it for us. And, we know there's already an existing relationship with somebody that we have a relationship with. It's a lot easier than just, calling blindly, because we have found, through our call center or emails, we're getting, applications from, out of state that obviously they're just, dialing for dollars. Again, if you call your accountant, your CPA, say, hey, who do you deal with? Who do you know out there? They're logging phone calls to us, and we're taking those.
Got it.
Peter, I can tell you that in Massachusetts, we had small credit unions, we had small regional lenders, small community banks, larger institutions certainly participated. But in Massachusetts alone, with PPP round one, there were over 450 different lenders who made a loan, a PPP loan, to a Massachusetts small business. And I'm talking, you know, lenders from across the entire country, because in Massachusetts, typically in any given year, we have about 135 to 150 different lenders use our regular SBA loan programs. We did bring on, you know, 20 to 25 new Massachusetts state chartered institutions as PPP lenders in Massachusetts. But I know that SBA has approved at least 7 of these fintech companies, whether it's Intuit, OnDeck, Cabbage, PayPal, you know, there's a number of them. And so using these online lenders in order to get a PPP application in. I know SBA is trying to manage, you know, the speed of applications coming in to make sure that everyone has access and opportunity. And we did blow through $350 billion in under 2 weeks this last go around. So I know that a lot of lenders had a lot of applications in their own internal queues, waiting for the green light in order to be able to submit applications to the SBA. But, you know, we do have a list of all of our Massachusetts PPP lenders, and a business who is totally unsure where to go to, they might want to try the Find a PPP Lender tool that SBA has, where they put in their location and it will populate with the lenders who are in their immediate general area, but you can expand that map in order to try to identify other lenders.
Sounds good. So we'll make sure that that attachment is part of what we send out to all attendees after the session. So we're at 2:58. I know there are some other very specific questions we weren't able to get to, and we will use our some of our other partners to respond out to the individuals who asked those to get you as clear a question as possible. But thanks you so much to Chris, to Robert, and to Richard for joining us this afternoon for a very informative session. And I also want to thank again our presenting sponsors, Fallon Health and Webster 5, for their role in helping bringing us this whole series. So folks, everybody who attended, thank you for joining us, and we will send you a lot of follow-up information and hope that we can get all your questions answered during this time. Thanks again, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everyone.